Welcome, everyone. I'm Carol Fitzgerald from readinggroupguides.com, a website from the Book Report Network, and the host of the Book Reporter Talks To video podcast series. Welcome to our Bookaccino Live book group event, where our guest this afternoon is Clare Leslie Hall, and we're going to be talking about her absolutely brilliant novel, Broken Country. It's a Book Reporter Bets On selection and definitely one of my favorite books of the year. It was a Reese's Book Club selection, a New York Times and national bestseller, and it was just announced as Audible's Best of the Year for Fiction for 2025. And the book was named as Amazon UK's #1 book of the year this morning. I mean, lots is going on for this book. In the US, it's been named one of Amazon's top 20 best of the year. And the audio edition of this book has also been nominated as one of the best books of the year by Audible. So I really love that I was one of the people, over 1 million copies have been sold of this book. And we are all lucky readers who have read it, enjoyed it, and I'm not sure what I love the most. Was it the character, the plots, the twists, the writing, or how it all came together? So let's talk about what the format's going to be this afternoon. Let me start by noting we're assuming that everybody here has read the book. You're not here for the wine, okay? You're here for the book, and we will be talking spoilers. I will begin with the discussion with Clare, and then two of our readers from around the country will be joining us live to talk about Broken Country. And then I'll share some questions from some other readers who did not want to appear on camera but sent their questions and comments in. And then we're going to take questions from the audience from the Q&A. So as the afternoon goes on, please drop your questions into the Q&A below, and that will be only shared with the panelists. So if you go into the chat, please tell us who you are and where you're from and possibly something about Broken Country. And then if you've got a question, drop it in the Q&A. Our fabulous voice of God, Tom Donadio, our editorial director, will be going in the Q&A to look for questions. And with that housekeeping behind us, let's welcome Clare to the stage.
Hi,
Hi,
Carol.
Clare.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
So good to see you again. I'm really looking forward to this. I think that as soon as I finished our last interview back in our first interview back in the spring, I said, okay, we're going to do this as a book club. We've got to sit and talk about this book. So I absolutely loved it. So let's start with, what was the start of writing Broken Country for you? Like, where was the gem of the idea that you came from at the beginning?
Yeah, it was somebody the other day described it as a vision, which like was so poetic. I rather like it. So I'm going to steal that. It was a bit like a vision because we live in this very old farmhouse in Dorset, surrounded by farmland. And the idea came when a farmer, we had this young dog, still have him, and he ran into a field of lambs and the farmer threatened to shoot him. And it didn't happen, thank goodness. But what happened was I got this incredibly vivid image, really. And I could see the farmer and his wife in their field of sheep, and I could picture a little boy running towards them, chasing after his lost dog. And for some reason, I thought that the little boy reminded them of the son that this farming couple had recently lost. And then I also thought there's going to be some sort of a physical, powerful attraction between the boy's father and the farmer's wife. So it's kind of like that essence of the story arrived in a single moment. And it was real, and it never really changed, that kind of love triangle, that sort of the passionate and the sexual jealousy between those three characters. It was there right from the very beginning.
And it's like, okay, there's this vision. Did you start writing right away, or you were taking notes, or what did you do?
The thing is, Carol, it was the shiny new idea because I was on deadline with my second novel, Days You Were Mine, and I was having a rough ride with it, as you do when you were on a deadline. And of course, this idea came, and I remember discussing it with my husband John, and just like, oh, this is it. This is the idea. Of course, cut to probably a year later when I was free to write it, it was a lot harder. That initial essence, that sheepfield scene, which is there right at the beginning, was always the same. But getting the right time frame, getting the right voice, which was just Beth's, was really hard and took quite a lot of work,
Yeah.
actually.
Going back and forth, figuring out, oh, what's the tone, the voice tone and attitude of the book going to be? What is it going to end up to be? I thought the book was so intriguing because we move from the trial back to the love stories. Like, we're going back and forth, the lives that weave between the pages. We go from passion to stressful scenes. And I think that's what gives the book the brilliant tension that it has within it that makes you just keep reading. Both felt like they were a bit out of their own hands and like onto something that like both of those things had to work together in order for you to do this. But it was layering those together to keep the tension going in the book.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, initially it was just the two timelines and the two sort of love stories, one with Gabriel, her first love, and then the other one with Frank. And what I really wanted was the alternate timelines to sort of reflect the dichotomy that she is in. So she's a woman torn between with this impossible choice because these two men are both great options and they connect to very different parts of who she is. But I think it was around 2.5 years in when I could not shake the idea that I wanted to include a murder trial. There's always been a man who died, and that was always there. But I just wanted to do the murder trial, and I think when I look back on it, it really, really took it in a different direction. And I wasn't sure whether I could write a murder trial because I'd never written courtroom drama before, but I couldn't get it out of my head that that's what it needed. And I went and watched a murder trial in the Old Bailey, which is a court in London, very famous old court. And I found it so inspiring, the kind of the performance element, really. At times I was so invested in the defendant's case and in the two barristers, the prosecution and the defense. And it really kind of opened my eyes to the British justice system. So I came home and I wrote that opening line, which is the farmer is dead, he is dead, and all anyone wants to know is who killed him. And then I'm like, this is what it's got to be. And it was actually my agent who encouraged me to spread those trial scenes all the way through the book.
Mhm.
I think initially I had them at the beginning and the end, and she was absolutely right because I think it gave it that thriller pacing.
Yeah. Yeah. And people say, like, what is this book? It's historical, it's thriller, it's fiction, it's love. Like, what is it? And I said, it's just a book you want to read. I mean, that's really what it just comes down to. But pigeonholing it is really, really difficult. But we do have the time frame in the 50s and 60s. What drew you to want to use that time frame? Because it says something. Just you have your head goes there when you're talking about that time frame.
Yeah, I thank you for saying that. I completely agree. And it was contemporary and it wasn't quite landing. And it was only when I thought 1955 and 1968, because I wanted it to be a big gap when Gabriel comes back. And the reason for putting it back was because I think the class system in rural Britain was really polarized at that time. And I think that Beth is a very unusual modern girl in 1955. She has these aspirations and she wants to go to Oxford. She's just as clever as Gabriel is, and she wants everything that he wants. And there's no reason why she shouldn't have it, except, of course, her life is knocked off course by sort of prejudice and snobbery as well as circumstance. And so I wanted to make that contrast between Beth, a working class girl, and Gabriel, this landowner's son, whose life is so gilded and it never ever defaults. He just swans off and gets everything he's always wanted.
Hmm.
So that's really why I set it in 1955. And I also I think somebody pointed this out to me, and it was thought it was a really good point, which is the generation in 1955, they someone like Frank, there's quite a lot of self-sacrifice, and that was normal at that time. And I thought that was really interesting, and I kind of agree. And the other thing that I definitely wanted to show with the men, so Frank and Jimmy, and also their father David, is that they're these 1950s men who are quite closed down emotionally, and
Hmm.
really that's the fact that they aren't able to grieve, and the fact that they aren't able to let Beth grieve is what is causes their marriage to founder. So it's kind of the bedrock of the whole story. So all of that I felt was really kind of apt to 1955, and that's kind of why I set it then.
It's there. Yeah. And did you have to go back and do a lot of looking of what would actually be in 1955? Like, did you look at magazines or,
I
just trying to
did, yeah,
imagine
I
what you
did.
look like, what your clothes like, everything.
I definitely did. Probably not as much as I should have done, but because I was always saying, yeah, I'm going to go to the British Library and read all the old newspapers. But I did a lot of research online. I read some novels at the time, and actually that was really interesting because not much was that different.
Mm.
I it made me think because In a way, you can go too far with your research. I definitely did with the farming. I think the early drafts, I was, because I didn't know anything about farming, because I did a lot of research and went out with a lot of farmers, I probably put way too much in. And
Mhm.
by the end, I'd sort of taken it all out. And so, yes, I did. I looked at magazines, I read novels, I listened to music, find music, not when I'm writing, but in between times. And I had a sort of soundtrack, particularly for the 1960s, and I find that really helpful, actually.
Like what people are interested in at the time. What are they interested in? What are they doing? And what are they wearing? And what are they cooking? Are all very different from now. Like there was no microwave. There were no easy ways to do things. It took longer to make dinner, things like that.
Exactly. And the absolute gift of it, of course, was that there was no technology.
Hmm.
And I'm writing another one novel now, and I haven't settled on my period. I think it might be 60s, it might be 70s, but what I have settled on is no technology. It's just, as a writer, it's such a gift
It
because
is.
you can just focus on the characters and the emotions and the miscommunication. And you just don't have this thing in your ear the whole time. But they could have had a text and they could have been on Instagram, and oh my goodness, the head noise that comes with technology as a writer is just exhausting, actually.
It really is because there's so many things that you have to think about of how would they get from A to B? Oh, they turn on Waze. They'd sit there and figure out looking like that. I was like, no, you've got to figure out. You're holding a map in your hand, or you're just figuring it out and remembering how you got there, you know? There's another thing in this book. Loss is such a big part of it. And I saw so much, it's hard to write about loss, but you had a loss in your life that I think really gave you the credibility, can I say, to be writing about loss here. So let's just check up chat about that.
Yes. Oh, well, thank you. I mean, I'm so grateful that I have three healthy children. And when Beth came into my head, a grieving mother, it I just knew who she was because I knew that she was every single decision that she made was made because of the missing of her son. I just understood her. And yes, she's flawed, but I knew that a lot of the seductive pull of the past is the fact that she craves being who she was before she lost her child.
Mhm.
And so in terms of my own loss, it's funny because I remember having this very exciting Zoom call with some film producers when my book was on submission. It was kind of amazing, and they seemed to love Broken Country. But one of the first things they asked me was if I'd lost a child, and I said no, no. I'm so grateful that that isn't my experience. But I realised that I lost my mum when I was 21, when I was at university, and this was the end of the 80s, and people didn't talk about grief or loss. And I lived in Cambridge in the south of England, and I was at university in Scotland, right at the top of the country. And I went 500 miles back to university, and nobody asked me anything. No one said one single thing. And that was really normal. Also,
Mhm.
everyone was kids. Nobody knew how to talk about grief or loss. But what happened to me was that I became very closed down. I couldn't talk about it. I literally couldn't talk about it for 20 years until I outed myself to some friends and said, I think I might have a bit of a problem here. And that is exactly what Frank and Jimmy are, particularly Jimmy, poor Jimmy, who's very dysfunctional, drinks too much, and really he just wants to hurt himself because he's lost his mum when he was 9, and his dad just buried his pain in work, and that's what they're taught to do, those boys.
Mhm.
And I completely and utterly identify with Frank and Jimmy, funnily enough.
Mhm. My husband lost his dad about that age, and he said to me, "You nobody knows what to say to you. Nobody knows how to talk to you. You've got this thing." And he goes, "You actually bury the thing." And it was a couple of years later when he started talking about it, and after we started dating, and I was like, "Wow, this is a lot coming out the first night I meet you." And it was really an interesting thing because you bury it. He said because nobody wants to talk to you about it, so you
Yeah,
just push on a
that
little.
this is exactly it. And I think we might have had this conversation before because I met my husband when I was 30, so 9 years later. And on the first date, he said, "You seem to like someone really defined by the loss of your mother." And I couldn't believe he said it because
Mhm.
nobody had ever said anything like that. And
Mhm.
I most certainly wasn't trying to project that image myself. I was all bravado and bluff.
Mhm. Yeah.
So yeah, yeah, absolutely.
There's this great line. This is a love story with too many beginnings. I refuse to think about how it's going to end. And Beth also talks about walking into what she does with eyes wide open. We feel her. So that conflict of Beth trying to be her best self, but knowing she's going in a direction she shouldn't. It was interesting. What was it like writing her of you're going the wrong path, but it's good for you?
Yeah, I mean, people have very mixed reactions about Beth. Personally, I love her. She's flawed, and this is one of the things. There are many things I love about her, but she's flawed. She admits it. She admits it. She's very, very honest. And there is the point at the end of the book when she sort of says to Frank, if you want to love me, you have to know how everything I've done and how flawed I am. So she shows him the ugliest bits of herself, and I think that just shows incredible bravery.
Mhm.
And I mean, I don't know about you, but I like reading flawed characters so long as I'm rooting for them in another way. And
Mhm.
I was rooting for Beth because she's a survivor. Her life gets knocked off course. She doesn't get the dream of going to Oxford or being a published writer. She marries Frank and she falls in love with Frank. Probably not at the very beginning. She learns to love him. She learns to love the landscape and it becomes integral to who she is. And also, I love the fact that this is 1955, 1956 probably when they got married. And she doesn't just become a farmer's wife. She's not just knocking up shepherd's pies in the background. She's driving the combine and she's birthing the lambs and she's hefting the hay bales. I really love that about her. So
Yeah.
she was kind of fun to write, but what I would say is because I was writing a woman who's shut down by grief or is in this terror trauma, going through this real trauma, and I understood her because I understood that was, exactly that what the power of the grief is that it draws her back to her past. But it was a great escape for me as a writer to write her 1955 timeline.
Yeah.
And I sort of love the contrast between the two and the fact, in a way, I found the Beth that meets them in the middle because the Beth who is looking back and looking back into the nostalgia and wanting to be that girl she was, who was so bold and so courageous and who put went into first love with her eyes wide open. And I think there's still an element of that, but I think she sort of loses sight of herself because she's gone through this terrible loss. And so I think that's almost as seductive as Gabriel himself in a way, is
Mhm.
to glimpse her old self.
The glimpse, I might have gone to Oxford. I did go to Oxford to visit. I did do these things. I'm not just who I am right now. I have a different past. I have a different past. People are always asking, are you Team Frank or Team Gabriel? And I remember the live event we did, we were asking people like who they were. I should have had voting going on today. So people want to jump in the chat and say, who's your team, Team Frank or Team Gabriel? I'm really curious. And what have you heard from people when you go out? Are people saying, oh, I wish she had been with, or what are you hearing?
Um, Mainly people are Team Frank, but I love it when I hear people who are Team Gabriel because I must admit that I felt very torn. I mean, in my head, he's an incredibly attractive character. And he's a writer, so there is that. And I feel it's really hard. I guess I was Team Frank in the sense that I knew and I never defaulted from the fact that she was always going to end up with Frank. So nice to be able to discuss this with spoilers.
Yes, you
But
bet.
and so I always knew that, but I found it very hard at times, which I suppose is what I was trying to achieve with the novel, was to make it a really difficult choice.
Mhm.
I don't know whether this is the case. This is a massively sweeping generalization here, but I do remember when I was in the States a few months ago, and I was talking to quite a lot of young readers, and they were all Team Gabriel. I was like, well, maybe it's an age thing, in that when you're young, you're all right with the slightly bad boy, and
Mhm.
then when you're older, you're like, need a Frank. I don't know. That's a generalization.
Yeah, but then if you got Gabriel, got the mother who said that
Well,
great line of "We don't stack here, dear." Like we don't stack. It's stacking the dishes. I thought that was so great, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, how un."
someone said that to me,
It did.
actually. They did say that to me, yeah. So I got my revenge 25 years later.
Yeah,
Got
it's
some
just they're like,
love.
oh, look, these horrible people. So there's a Broken Country playlist on Spotify. So what's on that? Songs from the 50s and 60s?
Songs from the 50s and 60s, quite a lot of Elvis, quite a lot of Rolling Stones, And then there's an Oliver Arnold track called Happiness Does Not Wait, which is instrumental and modern, but it was a funny one of these things, a bit like a spark. I was listening to it. I was writing in a cafe, and I had headphones on so that I couldn't hear the noise. And that song came on, and I was just like, and I just thought I can see Beth and Gabriel by the lake. And it became this song, this track that I listened to hundreds and hundreds of times that just gave me the early love story. It's funny. And if I hear it now, I'm right back with them.
You're right back with the Laura Dave says she listens to the same song over and over, the same song over and over when she's writing. So she drops into a space, and that's the only song she listens to. So to hear that you were doing that, listening to the same song over and over, is so interesting because it does,
Yeah.
it's like the atmosphere around you when you're just words on a screen, words on a screen, you know?
Yeah,
Can't
exactly
do
that.
that.
And I actually had this instrumental sort of I had about 6 tracks on a playlist, and I listened to them on every dog walk, every supermarket journey, every school run. And I think what I was doing there, I guess it's yearning was the overriding emotion, but I felt like I could stay with the emotional landscape of the characters. And I think it made a big difference. It wasn't
Hmm.
like I was working out the plot. I
Hmm.
was just staying with them in between times.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, it's
I
like,
think it's
okay,
very
they're in your head.
effective music. I hadn't realized how much so.
You're in your head. They're in your head. So Sony 3000 Pictures preemptively acquired the film rights to Broken Country a year before the book came out with Hello Sunshine. And so is there news on that? Because I know somebody's going to ask that question. So I'm sort of preempting the question. Any news?
I mean, the only news is that it's still going. It still looks really promising, and that I believe the script writers have finished their script. And so I hope that the next step is to go to actors and directors, but nobody's sort of said anything official like that. I just fingers crossed that it's going in the right direction. I know these things can disappear, so I'm just hopeful because it would be an absolute dream come true to see those characters on the screen. It really would be.
Well, do you know what I feel like is they're looking for places with not a lot of sets. And really, what you're talking about is the farm, Gabriel's house, the world in between, a trip to Oxford. So, from that point of view, we're not talking we have to create a war. We have to create whatever. It's much. That's one of the reasons I'm seriously thinking it's got a better shot these days because they're looking for a simple, like we can just go here or here
Yes,
or
that's
build.
very true, actually.
Yeah,
It's not too many different backgrounds, is it? I suppose there's Oxford, but
yeah,
wouldn't that be gorgeous to see? I would
yeah.
love to see 1955 Oxford. It would be glorious.
Perfecto. So in the last year, okay, I think how many countries have you sold into? How many is it up
I
to?
think it's 35 now.
30, okay, 35 countries. What do you think about this story resonates with people across the world? Because they're like picking up the people don't know the landscape there. They just know the love story. They know the trial.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because, I definitely thought when the book was on submission, this is a very English story.
Mm.
But that has not been the case. It seems to be universal. I think it's about love and loss. I think the thing that I would say a lot of people, and it's been, by the way, wonderful connecting with readers. I mean, it's been a joy, absolute joy. I was in the States recently, and just to get to talk to people who'd read the book was wonderful. I think quite a lot of people feel that the first love affair between Gabriel and Beth really captured that very visceral intensity of first love when you really believe you're going to be with someone forever. And I think it reminded a lot of people of the huge passion that they'd had in their hearts
Hmm.
back then. Because, we're not getting any younger, and it was a very, very long time ago. But I think there's that. So I think people were definitely reminded of their own first love affairs. And I think grief is pretty universal.
Hmm.
And I think also a sort of I wanted to write about a marriage that is foundering in the face of this terrible tragedy and finding a way through. So I hope that, readers have found it hopeful, and that at the end of the day, it is quite a hopeful story, I think, because Beth and Frank have to go through so much, and I think their journey is not only does Beth have to forgive Frank, she has to forgive herself, and that's quite a sort of big life lesson as well.
Yeah, it's like, okay, how do we feel about everybody at the end of the day? How are we comfortable with ourselves? Well, right now, Debbie Moore is going to join us from Syracuse. Debbie is one of our terrific readers. She has been, I think, at every Bookaccino live event, and she's really good with coming up with questions. So she's going to join us now from Syracuse, New York. So let's give this a second for her to pop on. 1 second. This is the fun part of technology.
Yeah, well,
It's
I
like,
get it.
here we are. Let's see, give her a second.
I'm always just grateful if my tech works.
I know.
That's, you know.
Yeah, I plugged in before because I was like, okay, there we go. And she's coming. We can edit this part.
Well, at least I have the audio on.
Okay.
I'm having trouble with my mouse today.
Okay.
So, but
There you
here I
are.
am.
Hi, Debbie, there you are.
Claire, it's so nice to have a chance to talk to you. I really loved your book. Um, and a couple of questions I had. One was, did you use the word country in the title of your book as sort of a metaphor for how we sometimes divide our lives, the country of our childhood, the country of our teenage years, the country of our grown-up years? How did you
Not
come up with that?
exactly, but I love that analogy, and I think I might use it in the future. What I was thinking about with Broken Country, I wanted something very poetic because originally these early drafts of Broken Country had a lot of poems in them. Obviously, only one poem survived. But so I wanted something poetic, and what I felt was also those early drafts were very much focused on the divide of this village. So like a divided country, the landowners on the one side and then the ordinary farming folk on the other. And for me, I think a marriage is like its own country, and this is a broken marriage. So that was what really pulled me to that title. But I was so grateful that actually most publishers went with it because it doesn't tell you what you're getting on the tin at all.
Mhm.
But I sort of love the I love the title.
Mhm.
I loved Beth. I thought she was such a complex character. The fact that she loved two very different men deeply at different stages of her life, and she struggled with that all through the book. Was there an idea or concept you wanted to explore through Beth's relationships?
Um, well, like I sort of briefly touched on, I'm very fascinated by nostalgia, and I was really I wanted to put Beth at this crossroads right at the beginning of the novel. So she's in this good marriage, and you see that as a reader, and Frank is an almost saint-like man on purpose, really. I wanted him to be this incredibly good man, and she along comes Gabriel, and this crossroads rears up at a time when their marriage isn't really working because he isn't giving her the space to remember their son, and she's so tempted. And but what I find fascinating is that I think nostalgia, we tend to think of it as being this quite sort of fluffy, sugar scented sweet emotion. But I personally think that if nostalgia comes along at a time of great turbulence, emotional turbulence, and you're harking back, you're looking back thinking, if only, if only, if only, it can be very persuasive, very seductive, that pull to the past, but you can't go back. You've changed so much in the intervening years. So I think that was the concept that I really was interested to explore. And the other concept I was interested to explore with the two love stories was I was kind of asking the question, is it possible to love two people at the same time? And I think the answer is yes. But perhaps that you love them in different ways. But what I wanted to do was to create these two men who were polar opposites of each other, but who connected to completely different sides of her psyche. So Gabriel is very bookish and romantic and passionate, and they have this very physical relationship. And then there's Frank, and Frank is devoted and he's funny, he's kind, he's down to earth, he's unpretentious, he's a great man, and he introduces her to the landscape. And actually, more than allying with one man or the other. Really, what Beth needs to do in the novel is to work out who she is and what she's important to her. And what I think she realizes by the end of the novel is that, like Frank, she understands that she's a caretaker of the land for her lifetime. And I think that's quite a big journey that she goes on to understand that.
When you were writing the book, did you write the two stories, the two love stories separately and then meld them together, or did you write them chronologically?
Yeah, I mean, kind of chronologically. I can't I can't jump ahead. Having said that, which is really frustrating because I wish I could, because there are sometimes scenes that I'm excited about. Anyway, but I have to sort of write it in order. Having said that, the book changed beyond recognition. So, those early drafts, if you were to see them now with all the poems, what was I thinking? You'd find it a very different story. It was, I think it was even, I even had a bit of script in there at one point in a very first draft, and it was contemporary, and Frank and Gabriel both had voices. And it was only after I had a break from the novel and I suddenly knew period novel, 1955 I settled on because I just thought that was kind of an interesting time, and 1968 because I wanted it to be a realistic gap. And then, of course, the trial. And it was only really after that big break that I realized how to do the novel, and that it was just Beth's story because it's about a woman torn between two lifestyles and two men, and that it needed a murder trial. So the murder trial was another timeline again. And all of those things came quite late. So I guess I'm just a big redrafter.
Um, one one part of the story that I really loved was how Beth um loved Bobby so much and Leo and the relationship between Beth that she had for Bobby and Leo, the son she stood to gain if she rekindled her relationship with Gabriel. Why was it important to you to include Beth's relationship with both boys as part of the story?
Because I really wanted the reader to see who she was as a mother. And I think something that I realized in the writing of Beth was that you're a mother until the day you die, whether or not your child is there. And that was so important for me to understand. And I hope I made that clear. And yes, I absolutely think it's so tempting for her, this ready-made family with the man that she used to love, and a son who needs a mother, and it's all there. But of course, it's not Bobby. And that was very important. And I liked the way Beth mothers, and so I wanted to write that. But also something else that I was exploring was with the men, was the sort of fine line between invincibility and recklessness. And I think this is something I find interesting and found as a mother myself. My instinct as a mother myself was I wanted to wrap my children in cotton wool. And then there's my husband who's completely different, like, and he would be like, well, they've got to take some risks. So I suppose I was exploring that idea in a more extreme version. And I feel so sorry for Beth because I think that she went against her gut instinct, and that was a great mistake. And in fact, she has to kind of forgive herself for the fact she did take her eye off the ball. They did, but so did she. So all of those things, which I find interesting in motherhood, the kind of the dichotomy between, perhaps, I mean, this is again a generalization, but how a father might think and how a mother might think, and that unbelievable desire to protect that you have as a woman. So I was kind of interested to explore that as well.
As I've been listening to you this afternoon, answering Carol's questions and just talking about the book, um, I just recently finished Pictures of Him. And as I'm listening to you talk about this book, it's like, oh my God, I see so many things between Catherine's relationship with Sam and Lucian. And, obviously the book starts out very different where, Catherine's can't even talk because of for a lot of different reasons. But did you draw some of what you had written before in Pictures of Him that kind of found their way into Broken Country?
It's such a good question. And Debbie, we have, and me, Carol and I have discussed this. In a way, I think of pictures of him as being a bit like a pre-runner.
Mhm.
It wasn't intentional. And when I was writing, and Daisy and Mine is very different. That is a different book. But when I was writing Broken Country, the versions I told you about, those early versions, the contemporary story, when it was much more about the haves and the have-nots,
Mhm.
um, it just wasn't quite landing. And then I had this big gap, and then I suddenly knew how to do it. And I remember writing an email to my agent, and I said, I think it's going to have a lot more in common with pictures of him. And then I didn't read pictures of him again until I knew that it was coming out in the States, and I was able to do an edit on it, which was amazing. And I was like, oh my goodness. I was shocked by how many parallels, like the
Mhm.
house, the mother, just so many things.
Yes.
I mean, it is a very different story, but there's definitely strong parallels.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I can't wait to find out what you're working on next because that will make it to my to be read list for sure. And
Thank
this
you
was
so
just a
much.
wonderful story. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you for your brilliant questions.
Thank you, Debbie. We appreciate you as always. Yes, we'll talk a little bit more about pictures of him later on. Right now, we've got Julie Brinkley from Elliott City, Maryland, and she's got some questions for you as well. So welcome, Julie.
Hi, and thank you so much for having me. And it's a wonderful chance to meet Clare Leslie Hall today. Your book was phenomenal. I am coming to you from Ellicott City, Maryland, and I have to say, for me, what touched me from your book so much is I'm a mom of three grown and flown sons, and there are a lot of books that just they're not really good guys in it, and you wrote good men in your book. And it just, even from young Gabriel, like I loved how much he revered. All of a sudden, I just, Beth, like just how much, he was very passionate and yet he was very cautious with her. I loved that. I feel like this is a book I could give to any of my sons and be like, you can read this. This is not something that puts men down.
Mhm.
Um, and so I
Uh,
love that. I wanted to say that to you because I
Thank
just I
you.
love reading good, strong men, and we don't get a lot of that these
Mhm.
days.
I'm so glad you think that. And also, personally, I love Jimmy, and Jimmy has got a very flawed, dysfunctional character. But like I said earlier, I totally got who he was because I knew that he'd stopped caring about himself. And he's just hitting out at himself, really, with all the sort of drinking and the occasional bouts of violence. And so yeah, I did love all those men. Even David, who's quite repressed,
Mhm.
but I
David,
understood
I
him.
mean, her own father, and Jimmy was a good man.
Mhm.
He
Yeah.
just was in a hard space, in
Mhm.
my
Hmm.
in my
I
estimation.
agree.
And to piggyback a little bit on Debbie's question, I kept looking at Broken Country, and we often hear like, was that always the title? And was it your title? Or, I want to know, was that something that was just personal to you?
That was my title. The very first title, it seems so strange to me now, but it was Savages. And that's because in the contemporary version of Broken Country, um, there were these I was really fascinated because of the dog shooting incident, that didn't happen, but nearly happened. It got me thinking about the farmers and the old guard, and then the people like me from London who'd moved into the country. And there just happened to be a lot of people that I was meeting who were just building these kind of knocking these lovely cottages to bits and building these great big glass boxes. And I just thought there's a real disconnect between them.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
my very first versions, the farmers were a bit more harsh and brutal and fierce, particularly with these kind of rather entitled people moving in and building their glass box houses. And so that's why it was called Savages. And that Savages, it was called. And then I changed it to This Savage Land, which I still quite like. And then one day, Broken Country just came into my head, and I just thought, that's it. I knew it was it. And it's funny that I think it's it because it doesn't tell you exactly what you're getting, but it just seemed to work for me because I think I was guess broken is broken marriage. I was really thinking about that. And I wanted something that reflected the pastoral setting. So
And you can totally see it. Like I said, it piggybacking on Debbie's great question. I love how we learn so much through those two words, broken country. And you kind of touched on this a little bit throughout the interview, and I was so curious even before because Beth talked about being a writer, and you get one poem at the very end. My question to you is, was there an edit out of Broken Country, something that was cut before that you wish had been kept in?
that's a really good question. Not in terms of the poems. I quite like the poems I wrote. I'm definitely not a poet. My daughter's a poet, but for some reason, those early drafts had all these poems in them. And the one that I could never let go was the one at the end. And I love the fact that Beth wrote it and that finally she felt able to write again because that's almost her releasing her grief as well. The fact she can finally do it. There was one scene that got cut, and I really still love it actually. And the reason it got cut was because it was quite important because of Beth and the fact that Beth could be unlikable. I had to work very hard on when I revealed her backstory. So, for example, she kisses Gabriel at the wedding. And then the very next scene is the oak tree. So I hope that the reader understands why she's doing what she's doing. But then there were a lot more scenes in that part. And I knew I needed to cut it there and move on. So what I had to cut was the scene which I really loved, which is when Leo goes milking. This is my farming experience, which sadly is on the cutting room floor because I went milking and I found it really difficult. But the farmer was so lovely. And I wrote this scene, which is Frank and Jimmy take Leo milking and they all sit there and they have cups of tea. And they take it from the valve so that it's, seconds old fresh milk. It's just a really cute scene. But anyway, I had to cut it.
Well, I'm glad we kind of got a little glimpse into it. Thank you, because I love that part. And I mean, speaking of it, I know this wasn't one question on there but I have to ask it because you keep talking about it. I just feel like the tree itself represents something, and I can't grip my head around what part. I just there is I know it's part of grief, like life and death to the tree, but what was the tree to you in the
I
novel?
mean, the tree, I think, I think one of the things, obviously that tree is cut down, but I think with the oak trees generally, I guess renewal is so important. And I think the tree really represents Frank and his guilt and his grief. And I can tell you that when I stopped writing Broken Country, which was for about 8 months, it was very painful 8 months, but I gave up on it. And when I always went back because of that scene when he sets fire to that tree trunk, and I could just see it like it was like it was a film. I could see him there, and I understood that he's setting fire to the things that he loves. The birds are under threat, and this is a man of the land, and that scene just held everything for me. So I think the oak tree is just sort of symbolic of their guilt and their loss and their pain, and actually him setting fire to it is him trying to sort of get rid of it or just move on, which he can't really do until the end of the novel. But I do think that nature, there's a bit in the book when right towards the end of the novel, it's going to sound quite fundamental, but I think it's quite profound for Beth, and she talks about the tree trunk and she realizes that the farm, the seasons just keep coming, and you get autumn and you get spring and you get the cuckoo singing in springtime. And what she realizes is that it's just it's happened before Bobby, with Bobby, and after Bobby. And I think she realizes that she's just a speck in this generation of people before and who will come after, who will caretake the land. And it's kind of quite a seismic realization for her, that.
Hmm.
Wow. Well, I have one more for you. Although it's really hard to beat that one. Would you say, I know there are a few authors that do put in or have a takeaway line in their novel. Do you feel like you have one? And if there isn't one, what do you truly hope what do you hope resonates with the readers the most?
Oh, takeaway line. I mean, I don't know that I do, but something that has been pointed out to me a lot, and I guess maybe it's something that is important to me, is when Gabriel tells Beth, um, you have to pretend you're the thing that you want to be, i.e., a writer. You have to sort of fake it till you make it, in a way. And I think I know until I was published, I felt almost quite ashamed of the fact that I was always writing these novels, and if I never felt I could have the accolades, and that's crazy because
Hmm.
you write, therefore you're a writer. So maybe that's a very important line for me personally, and I hope it helps other people too.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that one.
Hmm.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your answering the questions and for being with us today. And your book was just lovely. Congrats on all of the accolades.
And thank you for your brilliant questions.
Thank you.
Now I've got a question from Nancy Neer from Bonita Springs. Oh, and thank you, Julie. I'm sorry, I should have said that. That was in my brain and not my mouth. Nancy Neer from Bonita Springs, Florida asks, the romantic relationship between Gatsby and Daisy in The Great Gatsby, did that inspire your conceiving the love affair between Gabriel and Beth?
That's such a good question. I'm thinking always, 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 always. It's my book. It's my absolute book. I think in many ways, I love The Great Gatsby. I read it a lot. It's probably the book, along with another one, Moon Tiger, that are my constant inspiration. Um, I think absolutely that book touches on all the things I care about. First love, nostalgia, the things that I find, and also I'm very fascinated as a writer by the little decisions that you make that can actually end up completely changing the course of your life, and yet you may not even realize it until you look back. So all of those things are in The Great Gatsby. I just adore that book, for so many reasons. So and actually my first novel, Pictures of Him, well, it has this huge party in it, and that was wholly and utterly inspired by The Great Gatsby.
Your Gatsby. The book is so good. The book, I will just veer over here for a second. It was just, it's pictures of him. I've read both of the what I call your backlist, both of which are out in paperback. We've got pictures of him, and let me go the right way so they can see it in the light. Days You Were Mine. I've read both. They're both bets-ons to me. And it's very rare that within like 6 months you get the opportunity to see what a writer has done coming out at the same time. These are the backlist titles. And to be able to read Broken Country, and yes, as Debbie said, see strains in pictures of him, of what was going on. And then to pick up Days You Were Mine, which is a completely different story, but it's also about love of a child in a lot of ways, and family and what's going on. I think it's a gift to readers that you can go back and see sort of where the author was before, but you didn't read them 3 years ago. You can read them now. And also, it's all together. It's like within a year, you've got three things from an author. And I think that's a real gift, especially if you've enjoyed Broken Country. I thoroughly enjoyed both of the others. So I'm passing that along for any who have not read or heard then about them, because I really enjoyed both. And they've got your same style of writing, your same love of language, but not pretentious, if that's the best way to put it. Love
Oh,
of language,
thank
but not a
you.
pretentious love.
Thank
So
you so much. And actually, they're both, in a funny way, I think what we know is I like a genre mashup, because
Mhm.
They're
Yes.
both dark love stories with quite a heavy suspense element.
Yes, yes. And the one with the adoption is just like so interesting. It's, you know, finding out. And I remember when we talked, I think it was based on what your husband had learned.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
so just tell us that quickly so that people know like where that story is coming from. It was so interesting.
Yes. So Daisy and Mine is was actually it's about a reunion between an young adopted man and who has a newborn baby, and it makes him want to find his birth mother. So he finds his birth mother, and it feels like this incredibly seismic, amazing reunion, but it does go slightly wrong because I was very interested in the fact that you know they're strangers trying to have this mother-son relationship. And my husband John found his birth mother. I think he was probably in his early 40s, and our children, well, our youngest was around 2. And so that gave me the idea completely and utterly. And actually, funnily enough, because I hadn't read those books for 6 years, and I went back and read them, and I'm like, it's actually a deeply personal story. It's not their story, but there's so much of our lives in there. It's fascinating to me that when you're writing, you don't necessarily realize how much of your own life is going on the page, but of
Mhm.
course, there is so many elements.
Yeah, no, I highly recommend both. And I love this. Sarah Sauter from Taos, New Mexico reminds us that Goodreads has nominated Broken Country for their Reader's Choice Award under the category of historical fiction. So everyone, it's time to vote. And it's also nominated in the audiobook category for those of you who enjoy audio. And first round of voting is open until November 23rd. So there's my commercial in the middle of
Thank
the
you.
interview that I was so glad that Sarah brought to our attention. So remember, everyone, I know how many you love this book. So, you know, it's really interesting also because so many people that are saying, I want to go reread this book. I want to give this book. I want to like talk about, and people are, one of our, woman who edits our word of mouth section said she gave it to her mother for Mother's Day. So to hear what people are doing and what they're sharing about the book, I think is so interesting and why it's resonating with them. And I think that's what's so powerful is everybody's coming to it not only for one reason. Everybody's got a different way in of why they love the story. And that's, you know, so interesting to me, you know. So let me just see. In Pictures of Him, so we've got the Broken Country. Um, let's now go up to Q&A with our voice of God, Tom Donadio. Tom, do we have questions for us?
We do. But first, I just wanted to say that it was overwhelmingly Team Frank in the chat. It was a clear winner with just a few Gabriel sprinkled in, like 2 or 3, I think. But yeah, overwhelmingly Frank.
Okay.
So there you go. Just have a couple of questions here to start off about your research. Sarah asks, did you interview mothers who have lost children as part of your research? And if so, what was that like?
I didn't actually. And that's a really, really good question. I didn't. I what I did was, and it was really important to me to make it as emotionally resonant and authentic as I possibly could, considering this was not my experience. I just put myself in Beth's shoes and imagined how I would feel and the kind of raw desperation that I would feel. And also coupled with that, the longing I might feel to want to escape, which gave me the kind of her being attracted to Gabriel. And it was quite painful, I have to say, to write, and I still find it very painful to read to certain scenes, very, very painful. But what has meant an enormous amount to me was that, it was particularly when I was on book tour, a couple of mothers have come up to me and said that they had a similar experience losing a child in an accident, and that they felt that it, you know, that Beth's experience really mirrored their own, and that's meant a huge amount to me. And also they one of them sort of said she felt that Frank's grief was very close to her husband's grief. So I didn't talk to mothers, but I just sort of imagined the enormous, unimaginable pain that they would have been in.
And then also from an anonymous attendee asks, what novels from the 1950s did you read as part of your research?
So they're not exactly well. I read I think I read a Hilary Mantel. That's from the 1960s. They're not exactly from the 1950s, but two novels that influenced me. In fact, they're not the 1950s, but one of them is Atonement by Ian McEwan, and the other one is The Go-Between by L.P. Hartley. They're both period novels, and they both feature love across the class divide, and they're both rural novels. So I kind of was really absorbing the background of those two when I was writing Bread and Country.
Mhm. Okay, so a question from Sarah. Why did you decide that Beth would get pregnant again? Was this in your first drafts or did it come later?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yes, I think it was, yeah, it was always the redemptive. It was always the redemptive end. So I think it, yeah, I think she always did get pregnant. And really because I wanted to give Frank and Beth that. I wanted, I think what Frank and Beth do at the end of the novel is very brave. He goes to prison, and what I realized after I'd written it was that
I think, do we lose sound? Do we lose sound or just me?
I can you hear me or
Yeah, we can hear you.
yeah.
Okay, sorry.
And so I think what they do is which is sort of build their relationship from the ground up is very important. And I just wanted to give Frank a daughter. That's what I wanted for him.
Mhm. Um, Judith asks, how did you manage to keep the perpetrator and the victim a secret throughout the novel? One of the comments in my book club was how curious everyone was, so they couldn't put the book down until they knew. We were all in the dark. Well done.
Thank you. That's so wonderful to hear. I'm thrilled. Well, I can tell you, I wrote, I think some of that is instinctive to me. I knew that I wanted to shroud which man got killed, and who the perpetrator is. I knew that I wanted to shroud that. What I can tell you is that I had to work quite hard when you have this thing after your edits with your editor called copy edits, which is like it's like fact checking. And I knew that I was going to have a real battle on my hands because a lot of the stuff has to happen off camera. And I did have a battle on my hands about things like the gun, which the gun. I was saying we cannot have the gun in this scene; it's too obvious. So I wrote a really long and detailed, and I don't like detail, I can tell you. So this was quite hard work for me. I wrote a really long, detailed off-camera timeline of everything that happens. For example, I knew the question that would be asked was, when do Beth and Frank get married? And I'm like, well, if I say that, then you're gonna know about the big twist, which is, of course, it's Gabriel's baby.
Yes.
So I sent the copy editor a massive list of this is what happens, but we can't say so.
One of my friends actually said to me, I figured it out. I counted my fingers with the months. And I was like, I totally missed that. I totally missed it. So funny.
Yeah.
I have a question from an anonymous attendee. As someone who has been a betrayed partner because of an affair, I'm now seeing that it seems like every book out there has some sort of reference to an affair. Is writing about an affair something that you think is really that prevalent, or is it just a really good trope to write about?
Such a good question. As a writer, I think I'm drawn to big emotions. So betrayal is obviously huge, a huge and very painful emotion. I like to write about loss, and yearning and forgiveness and these sorts of things. It's funny because I find love triangle as a description quite reductive, even though I use it myself. But and yet I'm constantly drawn. I think what it really is for me, I can't answer for other writers. I'm drawn by what I was saying earlier, the kind of lives not taken, the possibilities of the things that you might have done. I find that so incredibly fascinating. And I think certainly if it's a love affair that comes back, then I think that's what I'm exploring. I'm exploring the past and the things that you didn't do and perhaps wish that you had. So if that answers the question, but I do know what you mean. I also sort of think as a writer and as a reader, I'm interested in people facing dilemma. I'm interested in, are they going to do the bad thing, the wrong thing, or are they not? And so it's that kind of those choices that we make under pressure when we behave badly that I find fascinating as a reader and a writer.
Mhm.
And a question from Carolyn. Is there a question you wish someone would ask that no one has?
I can't think of anything. I can't think of anything. I might have to
Well, what
come
have
back
we
to you
not
on that
covered?
one.
What have we not covered today?
Yeah, I know that that's a tough question to answer because this was such a comprehensive event here. We've covered so many aspects of the book. Actually, there are no more questions in the Q&A.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you. Thank you. And for everybody who popped in with questions, we appreciate it. And everybody who's commenting in the chat, we really, really, it's popping up and I'm looking at some of the things you're saying. I love how many people are saying they now want to reread the book. And I feel the same way because now it's like hearing, and you almost like you understand the mechanics now, and then you want to see how it all dovetailed and came together.
Actually,
So,
I'm sorry, one quick thing that I just saw in the chat. Julie asks, what cover do you like more, the US or the UK
Oh,
edition?
very good question. Um, I love them both, but I think the US cover, it jumps out at you more,
mhm.
I guess. But I was very, very fond of the bird. And I think I can say this because I've seen it on Amazon. My UK paperback is coming out in March. In the US, it's not, the paperback's not coming out yet, but they've designed a cover. I love it, and it's the US cover, but it's got a UK colorway. So it's like it's sort of bluey. So they've kept the blue but gone with the little farmhouse. It's really gorgeous. I love it.
And somebody's asking, is that cover behind you? But I think that's the Barnes and Noble cover behind.
That's the Barnes and Nobles, which I adored. I absolutely adored that. I felt very lucky that I got the two covers because I always thought there'd be an oak tree, but
Mhm.
actually now I see the oak tree. I think it's better to have the bright yellow. It's great.
It jumps. It definitely jumps when you look at it. Definitely.
I'm sorry, there are just a couple of questions that came in just now in the Q&A that I just wanted to ask you. Leanne asks, if it does get made into a movie, who would you like to see cast as Beth, Gabriel, and Frank?
I
Mm.
mean, it's a really difficult one, this, but and I sort of changed my mind. But originally, I used to originally think I could really see Daisy Edgar Jones as Beth, but now I'm sort of a bit thinking Florence Pugh. I just sort of everything I see her in, I just think she's brilliant. Um, and then Frank is really hard. Somebody like Paul Mescal, maybe. And then Gabriel, somebody like Jacob Elordi. I think somebody very slender and tall and elegant. What I love is Jacob Elordi in Saltburn, the way he gets that aristocratic English, entitled, kind but entitled. He just plays it so well. And I've always said to Timothy Chalamet, but for Gabriel, but most people don't agree with me on that one.
Hmm. I think since he played Bob Dylan, I can't do it.
Yeah, this is it.
Before Bob Dylan, maybe, but now,
And I think now that Paul Mescal's played Hamlet, he can't do it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's just you just get some views in your head now of
Yeah.
like who's who, who's who.
And Kelly says too young, I think.
Too young. Okay.
And just one more anonymous attendee asks, do you celebrate when you complete a book? What's your
Uh,
celebration ritual like?
do you know, I do have a particular ritual, and I'm not going to be going on it for a very long time, sadly. But my ritual is that I like to go to in the UK we have these picture houses, cinemas called Everyman, and they're so lovely. And basically, you can get amazing snacks, amazing drinks, sitting on a sofa. And I like to go and go to the movies in the middle of the afternoon. And I have all the snacks, believe me, I have it all. And I'm not on my own, which is very important. So that's my celebration.
I love that. Yes, and that does wrap up the Q&A.
So now my question is, what's next for you, and when can we expect to see it? Because then you get to go back to the movie theater.
Well, this is it. Oh my goodness. Yes, it's a good incentive. So next is I am excited about it. I haven't had enough headspace, but then I think I might have to get used to that. Because the last book I wrote out of contract, which is amazing because you just have day in, day out. It's another it's a love story and a mystery. It's a family. It's a little bit like in a way I'm channeling one of my favorite books, which is called I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith. And you've got this eccentric family in this clifftop hotel, seaside clifftop hotel, and they have these amazing midsummer festival, sort of quite pagan celebrations. And basically, one story is it's a young widow, the daughter of the house, whose husband drowned 4 years before, and it's a composer who's also a widow, and he's got a teenage daughter, and he comes to the hotel to kind of capture this celebration, and they fall in love unexpectedly. So there's their love story, and then there's also a mystery because there's a girl that's missing from the village, and that there's also the dead husband has a voice, and he tells his story up until the point of his drowning. And I'm really excited about it. I really love the characters. I really love the setting. Kind of need to write it.
It's just the words in between. It's just
Yeah, it's just that bit.
It's just like, okay, how about that little bit of dialogue? Maybe when I do
Yeah.
the dishes tonight, I'll think of a line. I'll go write it down. Something like that. But
Yes.
I remember you said that like on this book, you got to get in the moment. And then when you got there, but the book took a while. This was not a 5-minute
No,
exploration.
that's exactly it. And it's interesting to me. I always need something like a big emotional scene to pull me in. And this book, I found the composer and I'm like, yep, that's good. And then I found something which has got an element of self-sacrifice in it. I found a scene and it's got what I need, and it'll come quite far in the book. And that really helps. And it's funny how it can take a long time before that scene comes.
And then you're writing to it. You're writing to get to that point
That's it.
and out of it, in and out of it.
Yeah.
Claire, thank you so much for joining us. I have enjoyed every conversation with you, our live conversation in New Jersey when we were at Barnes and Noble, and our first conversation. And I just love that you talk so wonderfully about the book. And then when you read the other two books, you're seeing a whole picture of your work. And it's like pictures of Claire. All right, go over here, folks. This is like, words and pictures. Thank you so much for joining us. Wish you a great holiday season with your family, too.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, and right back at you, Carol. I love talking to you.
Yeah,
And so
it's a good time. It's
it's
a good
been an
time.
absolute pleasure.
I wish you lived closer. We would have a great time. I
Me
can see it
too.
now. If I
So
get
many
there, I'll let you
coffees we
know.
could have.
I'll go lambing with you. Okay.
Great.
Hope to see you soon. Thank you so
Thank you very
much.
much. Bye.
Bye-bye now. And to everybody else, we have a couple more announcements from us. Today's announcement will be available on YouTube and our podcast soon, and we'll alert you when it's live. And we've created an events page on TBR Network where you can sign up for all of our events. We've got a really special one coming up. It's our annual evening with our reviewers. It's going to be held on Wednesday, December 10th at 8 o'clock at night. And we thank you for joining us for this afternoon. We know this is not our usual time for doing a book club, but we really wanted to not have Claire doing this at 1 in the morning, which is the reason we did 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Also, our next Bookaccino live event will be on the second Wednesday in January. Tom, can you remind me of the date? Is it the 14th?
Yes, it's Wednesday, January 14th at 2 p.m. Eastern.
That will lodge in my head at some point. I'm not up to next year. So that next event will be on January 14th at 2 o'clock, where we will talk about books coming out from January 6th to the beginning of February. and we will preview March, which is so strange that in November we're saying we're going to be doing that. So if you sign up for our events newsletter, you'll never miss an event. And remember, there are more than 230 Book Reporter Talks to author interviews, including one that I did with Claire when the book first came out. And if you enjoyed today, we talk about a number of different questions over there, which was really fun. To everybody who participated today, we completely appreciate you. We hope you go back and listen to more of our podcasts and watch more of our videos. You can sign up for the events newsletter at our TBR Network website. It's tbrnetwork.com, and there's a sign there that's newsletters, and you can sign up for all of our newsletters there, so you never miss an event with us or any of the programming that we're doing. So we wish you a very, very happy Thanksgiving, a great rest of the day, and we'll be back in January with another Bookaccino live book group. We haven't selected an author yet, but we always take recommendations. So if you have one, drop me a line at carol@bookreporter.com. We're looking for a book that was popular enough that, like today, a number of people want to hear about it and talk to the author, and also something that's very discussion worthy. So with that in mind, thank you very much for joining us, and we hope to see you next time. Bye-bye now.